WGN Chicago.
Next, there is a storied history and book called Chicago, America's Railroad Capital. The illustrated history of the people, machines, facilities, and operations that made Chicago the hub around which an entire continent's rail industry still revolves. And joining us to share the story is longtime railroading author and photographer Brian Solomon. Now, on a whole other level, tell us about the George Pullman legacy.
Well, Pullman was an interesting guy. He was the first one to take the sleeping car concept and make it practical. He wasn't really the first guy to do a sleeping car, but he was the first one to get into the business and do railroad sleeping cars. In other words, you could sleep on the train and make it reasonably comfortable. And his Pullman Palace car business was based in Chicago, and he got into the business of not just running the Pullman cars themselves, but manufacturing the Pullman cars. And it was an interesting concept because he built the cars and he ran the cars on the train. So you, the railroad, would contract Pullman to operate the sleeping car. And then he got into building all kinds of other cars. I mean, the Pullman name is huge in railroad freight cars and passenger cars. But he had, in this kind of Victorian era, this paternalistic fantasy where you would have a city and, the company would be everything for the employee. And he believed if you provided good housing and a good working environment, and it was during the time of temperance, and you shouldn't allow your workers to drink because, of course, then they wouldn't be able to, perform properly. Sure. So he had this kind of very idealistic view of employment. And unfortunately, it really wasn't all that practical, and I think probably about 1891, 1892, I'd have to check the date in the book, but there was an enormous Pullman strike. And it was a very violent strike, and sadly he died. Pretty much. I mean, the strike basically killed him, but I mean he was fairly elderly at that stage, and that changed everything. But the Pullman company, continued to run the sleeping cars until after World War II, and continued to build passenger cars. They were the biggest producer of passenger cars for most of the early 20th century.
Amazing.